The air in O'Malley's tavern was thick enough to chew, a greasy cocktail of spilled beer, fried food, and the damp wool of navy peacoats. It was the kind of place that clung to you, its soundtrack a chaotic symphony of cracking pool balls, the tinny jingle of a forgotten pinball machine, and the boisterous overlapping laughter of men who spent their days staring at the endless gray horizon of the Atlantic. Here, on the outskirts of Norfolk, Virginia, the weekend was a sacred ritual of release, a pressure valve for the sailors and dock workers who fueled the world's largest naval base. At the far end of the sticky mahogany bar, tucked away from the main currents of the crowd, sat a woman who seemed to exist in her own pocket of silence. Her name was Amelia Amy Reed. To the casual observer, she was utterly unremarkable. Dressed in a worn flannel shirt, faded jeans, and scuffed work boots, she could have been a local librarian or a grad student from Old Dominion, decompressing after a long week of poring over dusty textbooks. Her honey-blonde hair was pulled back in a loose, no-nonsense ponytail, and her face, devoid of makeup, held a quiet neutrality. She nursed a single bottle of beer, her gaze distant, fixed on the hypnotic swirl of condensation tracing a path down the dark glass. She wasn't waiting for anyone, nor was she trying to catch anyone's eye. She was simply present, an island of stillness in a sea of raucous energy, a ghost before she ever spoke her name. The epicenter of the room's noise radiated from the dartboard corner, where a cadre of Navy SEALs had staked their claim. They were a breed apart, moving with the coiled, predatory grace of men who had turned their bodies into weapons. Their laughter was louder, their stories sharper, their presence an undeniable force of gravity that pulled the attention of everyone in the bar, whether they wanted it to or not. At their center, holding court like a king in his throne room, was Lieutenant Commander Marcus Hunter Thorne. Thorne was everything you'd expect from a SEAL team leader, and then some. Tall, with a jawline that looked like it was carved from granite, and eyes the color of a stormy sea, he possessed a magnetic, almost blinding charisma. He leaned against the wall, a dart held loosely between his fingers, weaving a tale from their last deployment in the Strait of Hormuz. His voice, a confident baritone, cut through the din effortlessly, each word punctuated by the emphatic gestures of his hands. "So there we are," he boomed, a grin spreading across his face. "Pitch black, can't see a damn thing, and the only thing we hear is this whizzing sound past our ears." He paused for dramatic effect, letting the tension build. The younger sailors and even a few of the grizzled old-timers leaned in, captivated. Turns out it wasn't enemy fire. It was a damn flock of seagulls that decided to take a midnight flight right through our insertion point. Scared the hell out of the new guy more than any RPG could have. The group erupted in laughter, the sound bouncing off the low wood-paneled ceiling. Thorne soaked it in, his confidence swelling with the admiration of the room. He was the alpha, the storyteller, the hero of the hour. His world was one of clear lines, of black and white, of us versus them. And in the comfortable, boozy confines of O'Malley's, there were those who belonged, and those who were merely spectators. It was then that his sweeping gaze snagged on the quiet figure at the bar. He saw Amy Reed, a solitary woman in a sea of uniforms and military-adjacent civilians, and in his world, she didn't compute. She was an anomaly, an outsider. His smile tightened, a predatory glint entering his eyes. The storyteller needed a new target for his next act. With the swagger of a man who had never been told no, Thorne sauntered over to the bar, his entourage trailing behind him like a pack of wolves. He leaned against the bar next to Amy, his physical presence deliberately imposing, designed to intimidate. "Evening, ma'am," he said, his voice laced with a condescending charm. "Don't see many civilians in here on a Friday night. You lost?" Amy didn't flinch. She slowly turned her head, her calm, hazel eyes meeting his. There was no fear in them, no defensiveness, just a quiet, unnerving stillness. "I know exactly where I am," she replied, her voice soft but clear, carrying a weight that seemed at odds with her unassuming appearance. Thorne chuckled, a low, dismissive sound. "Right. One of the wannabes, huh? Got a thing for men in uniform?" He gestured around the bar with a sweep of his hand. "Can't blame you. We're a pretty impressive bunch." He was baiting her, prodding her, trying to get a rise out of this quiet woman who dared to exist in his space without paying him the proper deference. He expected her to blush, to stammer, to either be flustered or overly flirtatious. He didn't expect the utter lack of reaction. She took a slow sip of her beer, her gaze unwavering. "I'm just having a drink." Her composure seemed to fuel his arrogance. He pushed harder, deciding to use their own sacred language against her. "So what's your story? Every Joe in here has a call sign, a name they earned in the suck. Even the pencil pushers back at base have something. What do they call you? Sunshine? Princess?" He leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper meant for everyone around them to hear. "Or do you just answer to, 'Hey, you'?" The jab was meant to humiliate, to paint her as an outsider who couldn't possibly comprehend their world, their sacrifices, their sacred brotherhood. It was a verbal shove, a challenge thrown down in the court of military bravado. The laughter from his men died down, replaced by expectant silence. The entire corner of the bar was now watching, waiting for the civilian to be put in her place. The air crackled with tension. Amy set her beer down on the bar with a soft, deliberate click. The sound seemed to echo in the sudden quiet. She looked past Thorne, her eyes momentarily locking with an older man standing at the back of the SEAL contingent. A man with a face like a weathered road map, and the quiet authority that only comes from decades of service. Then she turned her gaze back to the cocky lieutenant commander. Her reply was not a shout, not a defiant cry, but a quiet statement of fact, delivered in a voice as level and calm as a still lake. "They called me Siren 7. The two words fell into the silence like stones into a deep well. For a moment, nothing happened. The name meant nothing to the younger sailors, nothing to the civilians, but to the men who truly knew, it was a thunderclap that shook the very foundations of the room. Thorne's smug grin froze, then melted from his face as if it had been splashed with acid. His hand reaching for his beer stopped mid-air. The color drained from his cheeks. Behind him, the older man, Master Chief Frank Kowalski, a living legend in the Spec Ops community who now worked as a civilian contractor, went rigid, his eyes widening in stunned disbelief. The name Siren 7 wasn't just a call sign. It was a myth, a ghost story whispered in hushed tones in classified debriefings and secure training facilities. It belonged to the leader of a small, off-the-books intelligence unit, so secret that most of the military didn't even know it existed. A unit that had been officially decommissioned, its members listed as killed in a training accident 5 years ago. The boisterous energy of O'Malley's evaporated, replaced by a thick, suffocating silence. Every eye was now on the unassuming woman in the flannel shirt, who had just casually dropped a bomb into the middle of their Friday night. Thorne, the magnetic, untouchable leader, looked like he had been sucker-punched. He opened his mouth, then closed it, no words coming out. The swagger was gone, replaced by a dawning horror. He hadn't just been posturing for a civilian. He had been taunting a ghost. Master Chief Kowalski, his mind racing, broke from his paralysis. He gave Thorne a look that could strip paint, a silent command to stay put and shut his mouth. Without a word, he turned and navigated his way through the stunned crowd, heading towards the back office and its secure landline. He knew, with a certainty that chilled him to the bone, that he had to make a call. The ghost they had all thought was buried and gone had just walked into a Norfolk dive bar, and command needed to know. Meanwhile, at the center of the storm she had created, Amy Reed picked up her beer. Her hand was perfectly steady. She took a long, slow sip, her expression as calm and unreadable as it had been all night. It was as if she hadn't just turned their world upside down. It was as if nothing had changed at all. Kowalski pushed through the swinging door of the manager's office, the sudden quiet a stark contrast to the stunned silence of the bar. He fumbled for the light switch, his heart pounding a heavy, unfamiliar rhythm against his ribs. He was a man who had faced down enemy fire in a dozen godforsaken countries without flinching, but the sight of Amy Reed, of Siren 7, had shaken him in a way he hadn't felt in years. He snatched the receiver of the old, beat-up telephone, his fingers punching in a long, memorized number that connected to a secure line at Little Creek. "This is Kowalski," he said, his voice low and urgent, forgoing all protocol. "I need to speak with Commander Bishop. Now. It's a Spectre-level event." The term was a code, reserved for situations of the highest, most critical security breach. There was a moment of hesitation on the other end, then a click as he was put through. Back in the main room, the silence had fractured into a low murmur of confused whispers. Thorne was still frozen by the bar, his face a mask of pale shock. His men, his pack, looked back and forth between him and Amy, their own confidence shattered. They had followed their leader into a verbal ambush, and now they were all caught in the blast radius. Amy finished her beer, placing the empty bottle on the bar with a finality that seemed to draw a line under the whole encounter. She wasn't gloating, she wasn't angry. She simply looked tired, as if the whole exchange had been a necessary but draining chore. She pulled a few dollars from her pocket, laid them on the counter, and prepared to leave. She hadn't come here for a confrontation. She had come here to feel the ghost of a life she'd left behind, to sit in the noise and remember what it was like to be anonymous. It seemed that was a luxury she was no longer afforded. Less than 15 minutes later, the atmosphere in O'Malley's shifted again. It wasn't loud, but it was palpable. Two dark sedans pulled up outside, their engines purring quietly. The men who stepped out wore plain clothes, jeans, jackets, but they moved with the same disciplined economy as the SEALs inside, their eyes constantly scanning, assessing. A woman in a sharp, practical pantsuit followed them, her demeanor radiating an aura of absolute no-nonsense authority. Commander Isabella Bishop stepped into the bar, her sharp eyes taking in the scene in an instant. The stunned SEALs, the shell-shocked Thorne, and the calm, solitary figure of Amy Reed by the bar. The air grew tight, charged with a new kind of tension. This wasn't bravado anymore. This was the real thing. "Clear the room," Bishop commanded to one of her men, her voice calm but unbreakable. The plainclothes security officer nodded and began politely but firmly ushering the confused patrons out of the bar. Bishop walked directly to the bar, her gaze locked on Amy. She didn't look angry. She looked disappointed. "Reed," she said, her voice low. "What the hell happened here?" Before Amy could answer, Thorne, finally shaking off his stupor, stepped forward. "Ma'am, it was my fault," he said, his voice hoarse. I provoked her, I didn't know." Bishop's eyes snapped to him, and they were as cold and hard as steel. "No, Lieutenant Commander, you didn't know. You saw a woman sitting alone and assumed she was a prop for your Friday night war stories. You just compromised the identity of a decorated covert operative in a public space because your ego needed stroking. You will be in my office at 600 tomorrow for a full debrief. Until then, you are to speak to no one about what you heard tonight. Is that understood?" "Crystal, ma'am," Thorne mumbled, his face burning with a shame far deeper than any battlefield wound. Bishop dismissed him with a final, withering glare before turning her full attention back to Amy. "We need to talk." Amy finally turned, her body language conveying a profound weariness. "There's nothing to talk about, Isabella," she said, using the commander's first name, a sign of a shared history that went far beyond rank. "I'm a civilian now. I've been a civilian for 5 years. My life is my own." "Your past is never your own, Amy, you know that," Bishop countered, her voice softening slightly. "You carry it with you. That name, it still means something. It still carries danger." "It's just a name," Amy insisted. "It's not who I am anymore." She looked around the now empty bar at the silent security officers, at the palpable tension. This was the life she had fought so hard to escape, a life of secrets and shadows, and it had found her over a quiet beer in a noisy bar. As the heavy silence stretched between the two women, a new figure emerged from the side, hesitant and uncertain. It was a young woman, a petty officer second class by her uniform, her name tag reading Gomez. She couldn't have been more than 21, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe, fear, and an intense burning curiosity. She had been on the periphery, watching the entire exchange unfold. She stopped a respectful distance from Amy, twisting her hands together nervously. "Ma'am," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but Siren 7. My instructors at Dam Neck used to talk about you. They said you were a legend. They said you were the best." Amy looked at the young sailor, and for the first time that night, the mask of calm composure slipped, revealing a flicker of something else. Not annoyance, but recognition. She saw in Petty Officer Natalie Gomez's eyes the same hunger, the same fire that had once driven her. It was the desire not just to serve, but to understand what that service truly cost. Amy gave a small, tired smile. "Legends are just stories, Petty Officer," she said. "The reality is a lot messier." She looked from the intense bar room to the young, hopeful face before her. "This is no place to talk. How about we get out of here? I'll buy you a coffee." Gomez's face lit up with a look of pure, unadulterated reverence. "Yes, ma'am. I'd like that very much." Amy nodded, then looked back at Commander Bishop. It wasn't a question, but a statement. She was leaving. Bishop, understanding that pushing further would be useless, gave a subtle, almost imperceptible nod of assent. The formal debriefing could wait. For now, the ghost of Siren 7 had chosen to speak to the future, not to the past. The fluorescent lights of the 24-hour diner cast a harsh, unforgiving glare, turning the dregs of coffee in their chipped ceramic mugs to black pools of ink. The late-night quiet was punctuated only by the low hum of the coolers and the clatter of dishes from the kitchen. It was a world away from the testosterone-fueled atmosphere of O'Malley's, an anonymous purgatory where the lost and the lonely came to wait for the dawn. Natalie Gomez sat across from Amy Reed, her hands wrapped around her warm mug, a small notebook and pen sitting untouched beside her. She had been buzzing with 1,000 questions, but now, in the stark intimacy of the diner booth, she found herself at a loss for words. How do you talk to a living myth? Amy seemed to sense her unease. She stirred her own black coffee, her movements slow and deliberate. "You can relax, Gomez," she said, her voice gentle. "I'm not going to bite. What do you want to know?" Natalie took a deep breath. "Everything," she blurted out, then blushed. "I'm sorry, ma'am. It's just the stories they told, about the missions, the things you did." Amy's eyes held a deep, melancholic wisdom. "The stories always focus on the missions," she said, her gaze drifting to the window, to the dark, empty street outside. "They never tell you about the nightmares. They don't tell you what it's like to come home, to walk into a grocery store and have the sound of a jar shattering on the floor, send you diving for cover. They don't tell you about the faces you can't forget, the ones that visit you in the dead of night." She looked directly at Natalie, her eyes holding the young sailor's gaze. "The hardest part isn't the fighting, Gomez. The hardest part is the quiet that comes after. It's learning how to carry the memories without letting them become a cage. The uniform comes off, but the war, you carry that inside you forever." Natalie listened, mesmerized. This wasn't the heroic, sanitized version she'd heard in training. This was the raw, painful truth, spoken by someone who had lived it. "So, how do you do it?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "How do you survive? The quiet." "You find a new battle," Amy said simply. "You find a new purpose. For me, combat was about stopping the bad things from happening. But that's a negative action. It's a reaction. After a while, I realized I didn't want my life to be defined by what I was fighting against. I wanted it to be about what I was fighting for." She leaned forward, her voice filled with a quiet passion that hadn't been there before. "After I left the service, I started working with a non-profit that helps refugees. People who have lost everything because of the very conflicts I used to fight in. I help them find homes, learn the language, navigate a new life. It's quiet work. There are no medals, there are no adrenaline rushes. Some days, the biggest victory is successfully filling out a piece of paperwork. But I'm building something. I'm not just stopping the bleeding, I'm helping to heal the wound. That's my new mission." The diner conversation stretched into the early hours of the morning. Amy didn't speak of classified operations or heroic firefights. She spoke of the gnawing loneliness of coming home, the difficulty of translating military skills into a civilian world that didn't understand them, and the slow, arduous process of rebuilding an identity outside of a call sign and a rank. She taught Natalie that true strength wasn't about being unbreakable. It was about knowing how to put yourself back together after you've been shattered into a million pieces. Survival, she explained, wasn't the end goal. The end goal was finding a reason to have survived in the first place. As the first hints of gray light began to soften the edges of the night sky, Amy paid the check, and they walked out into the cool, pre-dawn air. The night had left its mark on everyone involved. Back at the base, Lieutenant Commander Thorne was likely staring at his ceiling, replaying his arrogant words over and over, his world of black and white certainties now a confusing shade of gray. He had been humbled not by a superior officer's reprimand, but by the quiet dignity of a woman he had so casually dismissed. He had learned a hard lesson about the invisible scars and hidden strengths people carry. For Petty Officer Natalie Gomez, the night had been a revelation. She had sought out a legend, a war hero, but she had found something far more valuable, a mentor. Amy had given her a roadmap not just for a career, but for a life. She now understood that the measure of her service would not be in the missions she completed, but in the person she became when the fighting was done. And for Amy Reed, the woman once known as Siren 7, the night was another step on a long road. She drove her unassuming sedan through the quiet, sleeping streets of Norfolk, the city lights painting fleeting patterns on her windshield. The confrontation at O'Malley's had been an unwelcome echo from a past she had tried to silence, a reminder that the ghost of Siren 7 would always be a part of her. But it was no longer the only part. She was also the woman who could calm a frightened refugee child, the woman who could find purpose in a stack of paperwork, the woman who could share her hard-earned wisdom over a cup of diner coffee. Her strength wasn't measured by her marksmanship or her tactical genius anymore. It was measured in her resilience, in her compassion, in the quiet, deliberate courage it took to choose an ordinary life after living an extraordinary one. The truest victory she knew wasn't won on a battlefield under the cover of darkness. It was won every single morning, in the choice to face a new day, to find a new purpose, and to move forward, one quiet step at a time. This story, at its heart, is a powerful reminder that we should never judge a book by its cover. The quietest person in the room might have the loudest story, and the most unassuming individual might possess a strength we can barely comprehend. Amy Reed teaches us that a person's identity is not defined by their past job, their rank, or the stories others tell about them. It's defined by their choices, their values, and how they choose to live their life each and every day. Her journey also offers profound advice on navigating life after trauma or significant change. We all have battles we've fought, whether on a literal battlefield or in the quiet struggles of our own lives. Amy's lesson is universal. The key to moving forward is not to forget the past, but to find a new purpose that gives your survival meaning. It's about shifting your focus from what you fought against to what you can now build for. It's a call to find service in our everyday lives, in our communities, in our families, in acts of kindness to strangers. So I leave you with a few questions to think about. Have you ever underestimated someone based on their appearance, only to be completely surprised by who they truly were? And more importantly, how can you, in your own life, find a new mission? What purpose can you build that helps heal not only the world around you, but the warrior within yourself? Thank you for joining me on this journey tonight. I wish you all good health, peace in your hearts, and the strength to find your own quiet victories. If this story resonated with you, please consider subscribing to the channel for more stories that explore the depths of the human spirit. Until next time.